Welcome back to the CEO Advantage podcast. We're glad to have you here. This morning, we have a CEO within the sporting industry. Tim Silver's the CEO of the Adelaide Crows. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Paul.
Tim joined the Crows in 2021 as the CEO. Before that, he was the COO at Hawthorn.
Yes.
And has spent a career in leadership in the sports industry. If you're a Crows or a football fan, you may be disappointed that we're not going to be talking about footy on the field as much as we're going to be talking about the business of footy and the business of leadership in the footy community today. Tim, every CEO who comes on our CEO Advantage podcast, we ask the same opening question, and that is, what was the first job you got paid for?
The first job I got paid for, which is, I don't know if this is embarrassing or par for the course, was I moved around a lot when I was a kid, and I was originally from Victoria, but I just moved back to Victoria when I'd started at a new high school. And I did a paper round.
Yeah.
I lived in Kew. I think I did it for 6 mornings a week and did about 50 houses. And I think my total wage was $24 a week. And I thought that was a fortune at the time. And I don't know if it started me on my journey, but it taught me a little bit about discipline and getting up early before school. You know, taught me about that you had to work hard to even make $24 a week. So I don't know if I'd say I enjoyed it, but it was a good starting piece.
Was that in the days when you had to roll them yourself first and you got them flat and you had to roll them yourself, or were they already packaged?
You had to go in and you had to roll them. So you'd go and roll your 50 papers and put them into sort of baskets on the side of your bike, and you'd throw them into the house. So you had to get there 10 minutes earlier to roll them. But it became an art form rolling. I could do it pretty quick.
Excellent. So you went to school in Victoria. How old were you when you were a paper boy?
Yeah, I was 12, but I did a bit of my journey is I'd say my parents weren't that settled when I was young, and we moved around a lot. They had a variety of different businesses that they tried and failed in quite a few, from swim schools to a water slide park to dry cleaning to you think of to car yards. You think of dodgy small businesses. That was probably where I was.
Yeah.
And we were doing it in different states. So I think up until the age of 15, I think I lived in 15 different addresses. So I went to a number of different primary schools, went to a few different high schools, and then sort of settled when I think I was in year 8. I lived in Kew in Victoria and went to that high school, Ballin High it was, for the last 4.5 years.
And was that the most settled you were by that stage, that 4.5 year stint?
By a long way.
Yeah.
By a long way. So it was, I think it was a decision of my parents that we had been definitely moving too much, and I was getting into an age where it was harder to continue to move, so that they settled and they had some success in what they were doing at the time, which was good, and they were setting themselves up, which took a while, obviously. But and I had 3 younger brothers and sisters, and that they went through more steady, I would say. But it taught me, especially by going to new schools, it taught me how to build relationships early. And I love being with people, but I'm not the over the top personality. But I when you look at introvert versus extrovert, I don't want to spend time with myself. I prefer to be with people. So you probably determine me as an extrovert based on that. But I still found it really hard to go into new places and build new friends. And it taught me a little bit about resilience. But one thing that I thought was easy to do when I went into a new place or a new town or a new school was to play sport. So I would play whatever sport was, I suppose, if I was in Queensland, it was rugby or it was soccer, I would play that just to become more integrated into the school, into the area, and I just found it easy to make friends. So I learned from a young age the power of community sport and the sense of connection and belonging to places of clubs, and it's something that I've tried to foster through my leadership.
Yeah. Both sport and food are the two great levelers, aren't they? For no matter where you come from, if you have a go at cooking and cooking for your friends, and if you have a go at playing a sport, people will don't care what your background is.
Yeah, I see that as well, and it was always a mix of different backgrounds through the sporting clubs that I started at. So yeah, I loved it. It opened my eyes to different groups of people, different stakeholders, how to act in different environments. So it unbeknownst to me when I was a kid, it sort of helped build a little bit of a profile in me that would help me lead as I become a more natural leader. And you talk about what you learned at school. I learned a lot of my leadership through sort of past life experience.
Did sport feature as a career path for you in terms of playing sport, or were you always did you have your eye on other things as you were getting to the end of school?
Oh, no doubt when I was sort of 15, 16, I thought I was good enough to play probably AFL. Thought I could play in the NBA or the NBL. I wasn't much of a cricketer, but I probably thought I could play Test cricket for Australia. But I was passionate about sport. I was passionate about all sports. I just enjoyed being part of it. I was an okay footballer, but probably like my level that I sort of tapped out was probably VFL, and but played a lot. Played amateur football for sort of 13 years after that, from sort of the period of 18. But when I worked out at around that age of 18 that I wasn't going to be an AFL player, an elite sports person, I knew what I wanted to be around. What I enjoyed was being around clubs and sports and people that had a common drive and a common interest to be successful. And that's where I wanted to be. And I didn't know how I could get there. I just knew that, people talk about having jobs that they didn't enjoy for their life. I don't know if I had a strategy. I decided I wanted to study sports, and I didn't really know what that looked like, but I just wanted to find any way I could to be around it.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There was a hint there that you were saying you knew early you wanted to be successful at. You had a drive there to, if it weren't sure where to put it, but you had a drive to be successful. Is that fair to say?
I had a drive to be successful, but there was also a fear of failure that that would drive me. I've always it's a carrot or the stick sometimes, and how you decipher between the two. I always was quietly ambitious and wanted to be successful, but there was part of me, especially when I was young, I didn't want to put myself out there to say I wanted to play AFL football just in case. But I had a work ethic and a drive, but I think it was more, I suppose behind the scenes. And I like I was saying before, I didn't know what it looked like. Like I don't think I knew what I really wanted to do till I was about 30 years old. And my son is now 17, going through year 12, and he's talking about what he wants to do at university or what his next pathway is, and he's unsure, and he's asking me for advice. And I find it hard to give him advice. That it took me another 13 years to even sort of work out what I truly wanted to do. But I knew I wanted to continue to get better, improve myself as a person, and stay connected to elite sport in any way I could.
There's two paths there that I'd like to follow with you. One is for young people deciding on their career, and you work in an industry where there's a whole bunch of people who are very clear on what they want to do, but that they're atypical of what a lot of young people have as their career clarity early on. But I just want to stay with you and I share an experience of my parents ran a business in the early 90s that didn't go well during some of the interest rate crushes that happened. And there's something, I think, as a child or as a young person that happens to you, seeing your parents who working incredibly hard and not succeeding at working hard. They weren't really doing anything wrong. They were just not getting it right. and the cost that has on them. They stuck together and made their way through it. But there's something that there's a dawning that happens for you as a kid, and perhaps whether the element of being the eldest kid has an element that affects your career. But I know it's driven me throughout my career to that fear of failure, having seen it firsthand.
Yeah, there's no doubt that had an impact on me. I didn't probably understand at the time what the impact was, but probably an experience that I remember. I think I was 12 and I was living in Surfers Paradise, and my parents were running a sort of a motor inn in Surfers, and that was the business that they were working through. And we'd only been there for 6 months, and I was getting driven to school onto this Isle of Capri, which is just a little island internal. Yeah, I enjoyed going to school there, but we had a dodgy car, and I just remember Mum was driving me and my sister, and she ran out of fuel and it conked out on the bridge. And I just remember being highly embarrassed. There were kids from school going past, and we had to get out of the car and walk the rest of the way to school. And I just have this recollection that Mum didn't have any cash that day, or for whatever reason, it wasn't broke, but she didn't have any cash. And I remember walking back like from school later that day, and the car was still there. So because she couldn't pay for fuel to get it going that day, and that just things like that. That you're right, they were working really hard. They were running this on the smell of an oily rag. They were doing their own cleaning. They were working so hard, and they didn't have enough money for fuel to drive their kids to school at a public school. So you're probably right. Like, I haven't really digested that myself on my journey, but maybe that fear of failure is linked a little bit to my parents failing so many times, but finally we're successful in the end. And everyone makes mistakes, and different leaders can deal with mistakes in different ways. But I've always been, without being crass, sometimes shit happens. You make a decision, doesn't always work, but if you don't learn from that decision, you're going nowhere. And my style is let's have the courage to make decisions where you can make a mistake, but if you do, don't let that define you.
Yeah. Was it Lee Trevino who famously said that the harder I work, the luckier I get? But equally, there's an old saying in poker that says good luck beats good cards each time. But there is an element of luck, isn't there, in both good luck and bad luck in how things turn out?
I think so, but I think there's an element of both in that Lee Trevino piece, that if you aren't working hard at the start, you don't deserve the luck, is my theory. I don't know if it rings true all the time, but and even on the sporting field, I see people that don't have the genuine passion to work hard and be determined to be successful. I don't think they are afforded the luck that others are. I see that, and I've got this interesting mix where you've got athletes that are under your supervision or leadership, should I say, and staff. Mm-hmm. And there's an elite environment, and you're trying to foster an elite environment. But how you lead one group of people versus another group can be quite different, but you're trying to uphold the same standards. So, that's one of the challenges in my job, but it's a challenge. But I love being around people that are driven for success. And I think that sort of passion and determination and fostered well through an environment, can take you places.
In my 25 years as a CEO, one of the hardest things to find was a consulting and advisory firm where they'd actually been CEOs. I created CEO Advantage to be the advisory firm I was looking for. Go to ceoadvantage.com.au and find out how we can help you and your team be the best in the business. You and I both led organisations that work with young people. The organisation I led worked with young people, perhaps not in the same circumstances as the young people that you're working with, but nonetheless working with young people. And it is a great responsibility. In our conversation that we had with Brent Riley, one of the things that I don't think that people appreciate on the surface until they think about it, but Brent's experience, for example, of saying he got drafted, but he lived in country Victoria. He was hoping to get drafted to a Victorian club, got picked by a South Australian, and as a 17-year-old, plucked out of his family and sent to South Australia. And you think about that as a 17-year-old, maybe a 16-year-old, and we think, wow, this is a fabulous life they're going to live. But they're kids some of the times, and they're kids thrown into a spotlight where every adult seems to have an opinion on their performance, which is, again, a brutal sort of way to grow up, notwithstanding we think that they're living this fabulous public life, but they are kids wanting to play footy. How does that factor into the way that you need to lead your organisation when you've also got a corporate function of an organisation to run as well? So you've got these young people, boys and girls, and you've got adults in a corporate function. What are some of the challenges around managing that?
Sometimes the managing the treasury function or the finance function directly conflicts with how you want to bring in these young people into your organisation, because I think you need to, most leaders will probably, you really need to invest in the induction, invest in these people when they first impressions last. When you draft a player, be it a boy or a girl, man or a woman, you need to get your arms around them. You need to bring their family in on the journey. If they're 17 or they're just finishing school and they're going to move states, you want the family of the individual to have that sort of trust and respect of the organisation, and you've got to build good relationships quickly. And that needs to be a strength of your staff. So there is a real power, and I might keep saying this, of providing a sense of connection to your club and the individual and their family, and a sense of belonging to ensure that they feel part of what you want to develop as a family type club. And I think that creates a really good culture. And it can't just be, we've inducted the family, we've built a relationship, we're now at arm's length. It needs to continue throughout, and it needs to be real. It needs to get past, I joke and say, it's got to get past the grunt level that you sort of give someone a nod and you say, how's it going? You need to find a way of building relationships that's based on something that is real. And so that's an important part of building culture with young kids, bringing them into your organisation. And for me, being almost 50 years old now, I'll walk the floor and I'll be connected with our young staff. I'll walk through to the membership call centre, or I'll go into our playing group where the average age might be 23. I'm a generation older than them. I still need to find ways to connect, build relationships, but also have a level of respect from them as my role. It doesn't need to be bash the desk, but you also need to build a good relationship so you can have strong conversations or hard conversations if necessary, but also got to have that respect around the leadership and that you're the leader of the club. But I also need people that need to connect potentially better than I. And that's where you need to find people with different schools or different age groups, different demographics that can ensure the integration and the building of the culture isn't reliant. Like there's a North Star and there's a leader and there's a CEO and there's a coach that will provide aspirations and direction and drive. But you need people within your organisation that will work for you, drive, I suppose, what the epitome is and the North Star piece is, but also make sure they're the connector. Make sure that everyone within the organisation feels like they're part of what I would keep saying is a club. And you do find through that, if you've got the right people in the right seats, that will continue to grow and foster well. But you do also find that people that don't fit that or have slightly different values that they nearly self-select out. We don't, we try to pride ourselves on getting the right people in and selecting the right ones. But there are times when you can probably tell within 3 to 6 months if they're a square peg in a round hole type thing.
You hear a lot at the moment around, and with the laws changes around psychosocial hazard and psychosocial safety and all of those different things. And a lot of leaders, particularly younger ones, but not just younger ones, there's some older leaders who are really struggling with this idea of how to have direct, timely, honest, authentic conversations with people. You're seeing across, I work with a lot of organisations at the moment where they're really struggling to make meetings work because you've got intergenerational young people, old people, different people in meetings. But this psychosocial hazard sort of component of, I'm afraid to speak directly to you in case that hurts your feelings. But of course, it can also hurt your feelings if I don't tell you, but I know something. How are you finding the having direct conversations and performance conversations? Is that easier today or harder today than it used to be?
In terms of my personal position on that, I find it easier. Like I've found it easier because I've grown as a leader, worked on my relationships, feel like I've got the right people that report to me who are the key decision makers that I am able to have a direct conversation, a hard conversation with, because we have that level of trust and respect, and it's two-way. Can't be one direction. It needs to be both ways. I've got to be able to receive feedback and deal with that feedback and respond without dropping my bundle. So I feel like as a leader, I've certainly grown in that space and foster relationships so that I can. But I've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's easier for me. And I do see in our staff, and probably more our staff versus our players, and I know we're probably not supposed to talk too much about sport, but I do find in elite sport with leadership groups and elite standards and the win-loss ratio of each week, that every week is reviewed. We're a Tuesday today, Monday, full review of individual game, line their forward, back or mid, and then the team review. So that is constant. And the leaders will meet this morning and talk about what worked on the game, what didn't, who would need feedback to improve. So I see it day to day in football, and that's a strength. Again, built on relationships, and some players deal with it better than others. And that's something, do you do it in one-on-one or do you do it in front of a group? But in terms of my younger staff, that's an area where we need to empower our staff to learn, give feedback, take feedback. It's not in the generation, this younger generation coming through. It's much more difficult, and that there are challenges with that, and it's something as leaders we've got to invest in our people.
When I was listening to you then, in many organisations don't have that frequency of like daily, every couple of days, particularly during season where we're reviewing our performance. How did we go last week? How do we need to go next week? How do we need to adapt our performance and all of those different things? We'd like to think so, but as you were talking, I was like, I don't know how many industries have such a focus on such a micro and constant level on performance.
It's unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's week to week. It's brutal. Each player is writing their own review. They then get a peer review, and then you've got a coach review week in, week out. And when you've got two sides of the business, when you've got the on-field and the off-field, I've always, and if you want to have the same similar values, you've got to have similar practices. So trying to bring what on-field is to off-field is no doubt a challenge, and it can be brutal. But we are trying to work on aligning them. as much as possible on how we went off field for each game. So it's something that I've learnt by being in this industry for a period of time. Probably the brutality of the on-field performance needs to be softened for on-field, and it probably isn't to the frequency, but it is. It's much higher than I would think many other organisations. And you get to the end of a season, and X amount of players need to be delisted, and you look at your structure of your playing group, and it's something that it's probably not as brutal, but we need to look at ourselves to say, have we got the right people in the right seats, and do we have the right organisational structure to be successful next year?
So on one end, you're inducting new aspirants and new families who have hopes and dreams of the future. But in the other end of the season, you're offboarding people and families who probably still have those dreams and aspirations but weren't fulfilled through the season. You were saying off air that the average player's on a list for...
It's about 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
So
not long at all, really.
Not really. And particularly when you say that career path for if you're delisted, for example, your career's over at 22.
Yeah.
When most 22-year-olds are just, in your case, as a 22-year-old, still figuring out how my career is going to roll out and build. For a 22-year-old who's delisted, that's quite a shock, isn't it, in terms of what do I do now?
Yeah, and it's probably one of our greatest challenges, and an area that I'd put my hand up and say we need to work on improving in that space, because offboarding, the brutal reality of offboarding and trying to give your players that leg up for their next job or next aspiration or next part of their life, we're not as strong at that as I would like us to be. We want, when people come into our organisations, we want to grow them as a person on and off the field, and I think we develop great young people and young leaders. But when that brutal exit comes, and it probably goes both ways, the individual, especially if they don't agree with the decision, don't want to reconnect really with the footy club that's made that decision. I still feel like we've got some sort of responsibility to ensure that transition is as good as it can be, and also help them if they want to stay in footy. How can we support them to find that? So it's a brutal game when you think of it that way.
And that's not just footy. I mean, that's across all elite sport, where you're one serious injury away from having a career change.
Yeah. And like even the trading players out or free agents leaving, trying to, what challenges me internally is to try to continue to have a successful culture. We preach as a bit of a mantra since I've started, and along with the coach, is around prioritising others. If you prioritise others and you uphold out the rest of our values, we'll talk about that luck, that things will usually bounce your way by being that best teammate. You say prioritise others and then you brutally cull someone's career, it's in direct conflict with that. So it's how you continue to have that mantra and belief in what you are doing when the reality is once a year, those brutal decisions are going to be made.
One of the key things that you just raised, and one of the key aspects of being a CEO, is how you are constantly in situations of managing the tension that lives in polarities. On one hand, I'm saying this, and on the next hand, I'm doing something that appears to be the opposite of that. And one of the things that you learn, for example, at some of the Harvard Business School programs, for example, is as a very successful CEOs are consistently inconsistent, and they can handle it. What are some of the ways that you manage in your own mind those polarities and that tension of being, when you know you're being consistently inconsistent and that's part of the job? What are some of the techniques that you use in terms of communicating that and maintaining you talked about how important trust is. So it's really important to lose trust when you're dealing with polarities like that seem to be contradictions. What are some of the techniques you use to manage those contradictions?
It's a difficult question, and it's difficult when it happens. I like to think that it doesn't happen as much as you think, but there's no doubt there's times when it's in direct contrast of what you're trying to build. I suppose my strategy, and I've learnt this over time, is to over-communicate when you are under that sort of pressure and you're going to make a decision that isn't going to be supported by some stakeholders and may go against the grain of another area of the business. And I used to think, personally, make the decision, you're the leader. It'll show some strength and be confident in your decision and don't let the outside noise affect you. And that was a strategy for a period of time, and it has some success and, if you kept the level. But I did see that maybe you potentially have to own this decision, own that it's in conflict, and communicate to those that aren't going to agree. But I think you garner a level of respect and continue your trust by fronting up and speaking to those groups or individuals. They may not agree with you, but why you made the decision and your belief and your thought process and why you stand by it, and open yourself up to challenge, because I want to have the organisation that doesn't just bow their head because a leader said so, but it needs to be a respectful conversation, and that's something that I've modified as I've gone. And I'm far and away not the finished product. I continue to evolve each day, and if you're not evolving, you're standing still. People are catching up. So that's a philosophy of mine. But my leadership style there has continued to change.
I know later in my career as a CEO, I developed this mantra of saying the truth is the easiest thing to remember. So, and I've got too many things to remember to get caught up in. But equally, not everyone can handle the truth in terms of but an authentic leader finds a way to always stay within the bounds of what the true story is. And I know we went through a patch where we had to let some people go. We had to right-size the organisation. I still, to this day, would say the worst part of being a senior leader is on those days, it's quite easy to let someone go who's underperforming or who's done the wrong thing. The worst ones to let go are the ones who didn't do anything wrong, but you still have to let them go. But I also find that the truth where people say, just tell me what's really going on, I've found that as I became more experienced, I'd say, well, if I can tell you the truth, but you need to be ready to receive the truth because you might not like it. So before I do, I'm going to give you the option to sort of leave it. Because if you really want to know, I'll tell you, but it might hurt you when I tell you this. And I've had some people say, all right, leave it. But other people say, no, go tell me. And it's been awful to have to say, you just really, you're not performing. You don't fit here. You're not right. And we've tried lots of different things and you're going to have to go. And to see, but I've had people really respond to that. I've also had people tell me to get far away from them pretty quickly. But that's the rough and tumble, right? You've got to own it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Some of my key personal values around honesty, trust and respect. And that's what I like to stand for as a person and as a leader. But giving that, if I try to compare your story to what I've come out of, like I did go through the COVID piece and working in sporting clubs that you weren't sure what was next. If you had a season that wasn't completed, potentially you were going to lose all your revenue for a sort of $70, $80 million business that could be terminal. And when you had to stand down, 85% of your staff. You could at least be honest, but it's hard to continue that respect a little bit when you're not sure when their next dollar's going to come in, and you have to make a decision that's best for that club or that organisation. But that when you think about the brutality sometimes of standing people down, that was a difficult process, and having to finish a lot of careers when I was at a previous club. So that was in 2020. And what happened with me is that I was fortunate enough to get the job at the Adelaide Football Club. So didn't go through the brutality of it, did it at my old club. But coming in to see, jeepers, there's only basically 40% of staff are gone. They're not coming back. These decisions are being made. So I was on the flip side of that, where you look at these people that are working incredibly hard to run a business on 60% of probably efficiency or optimum resourcing. And what I found was, through no fault necessarily of the previous administration, was a bit of a broken club, broken culturally, not sure about what's next because of the uncertainty of COVID. And it was a bit of the opposite, which was a good job for me. Was
about getting out of Victoria, who were really getting crushed.
Come here and you're able to rebuild trust, rebuild certainty, be honest, because you had a bit of direction about how we're going to grow. And it was great for me because it enabled me to look at these 70% of people, which are, when you, unfortunately for the people that left, but you're looking at people that are usually pretty passionate and driven and want to stay in this industry. And it was just around giving them a strategy and some belief that if they do a good job, we can really grow, we can respond. And I think that endeared me a little bit with this staffing group, that we were able to get back to where we were in 2019 in a couple of years. And you saw this smaller staffing group, and you could identify rising stars throughout, and just seeing them improve their career journey in a short period of time because of what they did within the club was actually probably the opposite of the pain that I'd gone through. And I do think when you allow people to grow within your organisation, you see them develop. That I won't say you've got them for life, but you do have them. You do have them really supporting you as a leader, that they've been personally successful as well as the club or the organisation successful. So you get genuine buy-in.
There was a patch there where you had, I remember one game where I think there was 16 players on the oval with less than 50 games under their belt. So that's genuinely rebuilding a team, rebuilding a structure with no experience. There are no deep experience there. And that happens in organisations as well, where you go through a patch of key people leaving or retirements or market shifts where you now have to lean into a new market and you have to have new staff that you haven't had before. So culture becomes really important. I just want to touch on the culture of we talked about managing performance and tough conversations where someone is not a high performer. In lots of industries, sport is probably more visible than other industries here, where you can get really high performers, in fact, outlying high performers. However, in a team and in a business and in a corporate environment, they may be an elite level performer, but terrible for the business of being you, terrible for teams, terrible for culture, all of those different things. I'm sure it hasn't happened to you, but where have you seen that happen in sport, where you've got such a high value person, and other organisations it might be a high value scientist or a high value salesperson or a high value subject matter expert, and in your case, a high value footballer. I guess we've seen that in some different clubs where, you and I could probably go through the names of elite level Brownlow medal winning players that no one wants to play with. But how do you manage in an environment where you've got to performance manage somebody who's an elite performer, not a poor performer, and also manage the effect that has on the team around them?
It's a great question, difficult one to answer and probably give too many specifics to it. But it is, and traditionally footy clubs have allowed their stars a little bit of a free rein at their club. Like if I talk 80s and 90s and probably people that were the best players on the field. But if you're trying to uphold standards and cultural values,
weren't great humans off it.
And the leadership at the time would allow, it's like they've got a gold pass to do what they do because they perform on the field. I personally can see how that ruins cultures, really. And it doesn't, if you want team success and allow an individual free rein, it will never work. So I've seen that in the past, and I think footy clubs have got better than that. But back to your original question, how do you deal with someone who's elite in one area and not so in the other? Again, you've got to find that way to give feedback that is right for the individual. I talked about building relationships, etc. But if you don't have that relationship, you've got to find someone within the organisation, someone who's valued or trusted, or they respect their opinion, to give that feedback so that they can see what is to the detriment of the club and the culture and the values, and what would be a positive. But sometimes there's going to be individuals that probably don't care so much for the feedback, and how you as a club or an organisation make that decision on whether that high-performing individual is the right fit would be one of the biggest challenges for football clubs across the board. And I don't think it's as bad as it was in the 80s or 90s, but it is something that continues to challenge organisations because the output on the field might far outweigh what they do within the four walls.
In my life as the CEO of SYC, we would find that we'd have young people who had difficult situations that have led to them being clients of ours, but were on a road to a good path, and where they found employment, for example, and found stable housing, but came from an environment where that made them an outlier in their social circle. And often it was in spite of their best attempts, the people around them were what I call crabs in a bucket sometimes, with one crab trying to get over the side of the bucket and the rest of the crabs grabbing it, pulling it back into the bucket. Footy players have a similar sort of challenge sometimes where because of their high profile, because there are club supporters and people around the clubs that are not always have a human view of who's. How do you manage that sort of whether that's club supporters or extended people around footy players in the footy club, all who really sometimes are corroding your culture and corroding your business model as well? How do you handle that?
It sounds like it's a difficult job, but you do have so many different stakeholders with so many different views, whether it's your coterie groups that will come in and they're sort of on the periphery of the club, but they're in. You've got your sponsors, you've got your supporter groups, and they're vast in number. You've got what the media say. You've got these high-profile players that might be going to a cafe for a coffee in the morning, and they've got someone who comes up to them and gives them advice. Moving to this town, I didn't realise the profile that potentially I would get moving into this job, and I don't think I would have had it in Victoria, but people would give me feedback and on list management decisions or what the coaches move on the weekends. These are all areas that could corrode a little bit of your culture because you've got that in your head and you've got that feedback. What I think is important that when you get inside the four walls of the club, that it's as normal as possible. You've got to find a way to block out the noise and deal with each other as people. Let's not hero our stars. They are just people. We've got a common goal. We're fiercely driven for success on the field, but we're also fiercely driven to have a good culture that people, our players and staff and our coaches all want to be at. We want to retain the best as well as attract the best. So positioning ourselves as a destination club that handles itself well by having this huge profile in this state is a challenge, but something that we're determined to continue to build. And I think we've done that reasonably well. We've still got a way to go.
So I was saying that says it's lonely at the top. And I know there's not a CEO who sort of goes that, everybody, there are times when you are the only one alone with decisions that you've got to make that you can't discuss with anybody until you've made the decision. How important is it to have peers who understand what you do?
It's ultra important. And again, I've spoken about how potentially when I started my leadership journey, it was, this is your decision. You need to own it. Sort of trying to have that tough exterior of make the decision, be bold. You don't need to seek outside advice. And I think I've adapted that as I've gone. I think I am a collaborative leader, but the buck stops with me. And so when the call is made, I need to make that decision and I need to be held to account. And you're right, there are times when you don't have the opportunity to speak to anyone internally about that. So I probably don't have a long list of mentors, but I have a few people that I trust, and maybe I wouldn't call them mentors, peers, to more your point, that I've got people that are in similar roles that I can at least, and we can do it both ways, so I can at least bounce. Maybe it's not giving the intricate details, but it is giving the principles of the decision, who's going to be affected negatively, who's going to be affected positively, and what I'm trying to get out of making that decision. So there are a couple of people that I trust. It's probably a small handful, but there are a few, and it's around people that have similar positions. I have joined this group that's called a leader. Both myself and our coach have joined, and what is part of that is that you get paired with different people of similar roles as you in sport across the world. So I'm in a group at the moment of 6 different leaders from NBA, NHL, English Premier League, NBL here, and NRL. Mm-hmm. And we're in a Chatham House Rules sort of group. We're in it for a 12-month period. We meet every 3 weeks or 6 weeks, depending on which phase we're in. But they are a group that you build a relationship with, and you probably don't have to give the intricate details of some of the challenges you're seeing, and it's by Zoom. But that's something that I've also. Sometimes it's just good to talk about your challenge. Just your partner probably doesn't want to hear about work all the time because you're so invested in your work when you're at home. If you can talk about family and life and normalcy, I think that gives you a better balance. But having a group of leaders in similar sort of roles with similar challenges, I've found that a benefit that I've only been doing for the last 12 or 18 months.
Yeah. Speaking of going home, last question. I ask the same question of everybody. You've had one of those days where just everybody's been at you and it's just not a great day, and you're in the car on the way home, and a song comes on the radio that no matter how bad a mood you're in will just make you smile. what's the song for you that can come on the radio and just change your bad mood into a smile?
I did know this question was coming, and I still probably don't have the answer around making me smile. But the song that I thought of when I first heard this question was by Foo Fighters, Everlong, and that's basically my favourite song.
Yeah.
And I like the acoustic version. I've got an acoustic version on my Spotify list. I can't remember where it was, but that would be my song because, like I said before, it's just my favourite song, and I've seen them live here recently. Just a great band.
Yeah, they're coming again later this year.
I'll be there, no doubt.
We will be too. Fantastic. Tim Silvers, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been excellent having you with us.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Much appreciated.